Hey, folks, and welcome to the show. Thanks for stopping by. We're going to talk about awards tonight, and joining me are a representative of the SD HistCon Summit Award, Harold Buchanan. Hi, Harold. Thanks for coming.
Hello, Gary. Hello, Matt.
Hey.
And Matt from the Historical Board Game Awards. Is it Historical Board Game or Historical Board Gaming Awards?
Historical Board Game Awards.
Okay, good. I didn't screw it up. Great. I'm happy to not screw it up every once in a while. So I was thinking like I was going to do a live stream about awards and about, kind of the thought processes that we are going into this. And I've had a lot of private conversations about this, but then I said to myself, this is stupid. I can get content out of this. So I'll ask Harold and Matt to come on and we can all kind of talk about it, compare notes, and I can steal all of their best ideas. So I will. I'll start out with. So we have, I think, maybe not complete coverage of all adjacent war game adjacent or conflict simulations adjacent awards here tonight, right? There's nobody here from the Zenobia Award, for example, which I would have liked to have done, but I wasn't frankly sure who to contact. I'm sure there's a couple others that I'm missing. I mean, hell, we could have got somebody from the Origins Awards, but they didn't answer my email. So Harold and Matt did. So I guess I'm gonna start with you, Harold, because the Summit Award has like happened now, right, for the first time, and the winner, of course, was the well-deserved Red Flag Over Paris by our mutual friend Fred Serval. And so what was kind of the thought process of, because you've been running the SD HistCon has been going for a while, right? I know you're not the only person behind the scenes because you still have hair, but what was kind of the thought process a couple of years in of setting up, hey, let's do an award? What did that look like? Or was it that simple?
No, I think it worked. I think it all kind of fell into place. We've been pretty active doing conventions. It's where we started, was face-to-face conventions. Then we added in the past year, since the pandemic, we've added a bunch of online conventions. One coming up on March 18, by the way.
Yep.
That Gary,
I get to go this time. Harold has made a clerical error and not scheduled it when I was doing something else.
He gave me the wrong dates. So, but Gary's going to be heavily involved. And then we've got, the Conflicts of Interest online magazine is a place for us to tell the stories we want to tell. And that's been great. And then, just in that vein, we said, let's start a discussion about a game that increases the accessibility in the hobby, because that's a big theme of what our organization is about. We love historical games. That's why we're all together. But we really are interested in growing community and accessibility. And so we said, let's just keep it simple. One award. Matt did it simple too. So just so it was elegant and we could pull it all together and make it very executable in the context of everything we have going on. So that's what we did. And
that sounds crazy.
Yeah, we didn't inherit a huge infrastructure requirement like you did, Gary. But it was easy. The structure was, we go to the public first and ask them to nominate. I actually even threw in a game at random to respondents. And so we got a good number of responses, and they also did a lot of good groundwork for us. There were some that didn't meet qualifications. They were in the wrong year, or they weren't a substantial reprint, that sort of thing. But for the most part, public did a lot of really good work of finding stuff for us, and really flushing a lot of that to the top. Then we got together with the board and the advisory board and sat down and discussed it over a handful of meetings, and then selected by vote of that community. And it's very executable, very easy, and we're all very pleased with the result. That we get Fred's excellent game a little bit of additional recognition.
Also a Charles S. Roberts Awards winner, I will point out.
Yes.
So Matt, what was your and the rest of the Historical Board Game Awards team? Because I know you've got it. It's not just you running it. Although we have a amazing collection of foreheads here on the stream tonight. But aside from that, everybody still got some remaining hair.
Does this
So,
help?
so what was your? Well, you get to see the glare off my forehead. So what was the historical board game awards kind of thought process towards establishing your award, which is now well underway for its first award, right?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
turned
So
my ballot in a couple days ago.
when real quick, I'll mention it's Bill Smony and I. I think a lot of us have had interactions with Bill, but
Mhm.
Bill's just been a great resource, and it started with a sounding board. And this is no shade against what you've inherited, Gary. You've done excellent work with Charles S. Roberts over the last 3 months, but it kind of started with
See all this gray hair? This is all
oh
gray
yeah,
hair right
trust
here.
me,
It's all
trust me,
gray
brother.
hair.
I got plenty of
More
gray.
gray hair right here.
It kind of started with, hey, where the hell are the Charlies? And then it kind of turned into a sounding board. And similarly to what Harold said, um, getting, and it's not manipulative in any way, but by having this panel of voting committee or judges or whatever you want to call it, you have some of the legwork done for you. So you have judges offering all these different perspectives. And then we don't necessarily have to go through thousands and thousands of games to see what's eligible because we have this feedback coming in. Much like Harold had the public coming in and nominating their games, we have this panel of judges, 25 of them nominating up to 5 games, up to 6 games. No, it's 3 per judge, and then there will be 6 finalists. And that also is just less noise for the final fan vote as well. So it's then easier for the end result as well. So much like Harold, it's okay, here's something we want to do. Let's try not to break our backs executing this plan. And again, I think it was, so far it's been a relatively easy process. I honestly think the hardest thing is going to be figuring out how to present them. And just
I'm sure Dan would be delighted to prepare an awards show for you.
No, that's okay. Thanks.
I think we're keeping Dan reasonably busy on our side. I would now chime in with a exhaustive history of the Charles S. Roberts Awards, but I am completely unprepared to do that because for an award that's been around since next year it'll be 50 years actually. So I just thought of that. We might have to have a special thing for that, but I don't feel like I really know a ton about the history of the awards other than what I can observe from the lists of winners and nominees from the past and the relatively limited resources that we've had to look at, right? I know some origins 1974, some guys got together and circulated a ballot on the spot and declared a winner on the spot, and that was that. And I believe that was Third Reich, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm not sure I can. I have a lot of solid footing to compare history, beyond that. But I do have people working on that. So
Good.
maybe we'll get back together in a year, and I'll have like an article or something. But when it comes to then you got to think about. I mean, obviously, we're not the first people to ever run awards, right?
No.
So have we kind of looked at other awards for other things, movie awards or book awards or the Nobel Prize or whatever, to kind of model after our process after that, or at least have taken inspiration from that. I'll start with this because again, I'm going to give the cheap, lazy answer and say no. I got what I got, so we kind of run, and we're going to make some substantial changes, based on what we have seen, not only for 2021, but for in the last few years to try and address some of the concerns that have come up. Mainly voiced by me. That's a great lesson for you folks watching in the audience. If you complain too loud, they'll put you in charge. Which I believe was the exact. I don't have a recording of it, but I believe that was the exact conversation. So, Harold, were there any other awards that you looked at and said, I kind of like the way this is being handled? Let's kind of model ourselves after this process.
I think given more time and more resources, we might have done that. But to be honest, we didn't. And I think, most of us, I knew a good bit about Charlie's. You and I have discussed the Charlie's privately a good bit, and even some publicly. And you're very kind to do that in very open fashion, which is one of the great things about your version rendition, your reign over the Charlies. But we also have some constraints that make us weird, right? I mean, we're such a small hobby, and the print runs are so small, and there's no movies. I mean, there are movie stars in concept, but not in compensation, right? We're all hobbyists. We have other jobs. For the most part. I don't know about Matt with that game portfolio back there. I'd probably spend some time organizing that. Sorry, Matt. So yeah, I mean, the fact that there really aren't a lot of choices. There aren't a lot of resources. There aren't a lot of choices. So we have to do it in a way where we limit input, limit panels, all of those sorts of things. And I think we also started small. At least Matt and I didn't. You had no luxury to make that choice, Gary. But
we could have, but it would have been crap.
You would have, boy, it would have. Yeah, that's a big change. Talk about moving people's cheese.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that was. The answer is not really. We didn't look a lot at other.
Okay, that's fair. So, Matt, did you guys look at any other awards to try and steal some good ideas or something?
Yeah, totally. And I'm happy to share that. I think it really honestly started with the Charles S. Roberts Awards. And if you go back and listen to early History on the Table episodes, our end of the year shows followed the Charlies. Okay, what's our favorite Napoleonics games? And it was just me, even before Rich. We're not playing Napoleonics games. We're both not big. So what's the point of even talking about those? So then when I started to look at the process, it's okay, well, if I'm not going to talk about Napoleonics, what should we award? As we transition to the historical board game awards. So then I started to look at, okay, here's how the Charles S. Roberts do it. Sorry, I'm kicking my camera there. How does Spiel des Jahres do it? That's the biggest award in board games. What can we take from that? And, they have a very small voting committee, and they just play everything together as much as they can over a year, and they eliminate games as they go along. And obviously I don't have the bandwidth to do that or the regular play time to do that. So then it started to look at other things and then expand the viewpoints. So it's not just my viewpoint. It's not just Bill's viewpoint. Try to get as many people as possible. And we looked at the Video Game Awards, which use a similar process. They have about 100 different juries, and they all focus on, for lack of a better term, media members. And I really like that idea. So I wanted to do the same thing with our awards, just because you have an open fan vote already with the Charles S. Roberts Awards. So then from there, the final way is, okay, who else is using ranked choice voting? And as Bill already indicated, the Heisman Awards. Not that we're trying to hold ourselves to that level, but we did take some inspiration, especially with the final vote structure. Look at the Heisman. I see Second Fleet back there, Harold. And
the Hugo Awards also use ranked choice vote. And it's kind of open. So this is a sort of one of the awards that I've followed for a long time, right? Less so now because I got stuff to do. But the Hugo Awards are the Oscars. So the Oscars basically operate through the Academy, right? There's an Academy, and the Academy votes on who the nominees are going to be. And those are people that work in Hollywood, right? Most members of the Academy are actually actors. So the body of actors makes up the majority of the people that get to decide who the winners are. The Hugo Awards uses a sort of ranked voice thing where each round of voting, you'll rank your entries if you're a voter, and you have to be a member of the convention, the World Science Fiction Conventions, to vote. Okay, which is not particularly inexpensive. For those complaining gaming conventions are expensive, go to the World Science Fiction Convention one year. It's like $200. So they have you submit one ballot with ranked choices, and then each round one is eliminated. The lowest ranked vote is eliminated, and then you go up a rank, and then I'm not sure I'm explaining this well, but then at the end you keep performing that process until there's only one remaining, right? Including, and no award is one of the things you can vote for. What I don't know is who kind of manages that, and that was a real struggle for us over the last for the Charles S. Roberts Awards in the last several years. Is kind of who makes the determination of which games are eligible, just based strictly on year, right? Year of release. And the resources available to us are not awesome. One thing we found, a lot of games released very early in 2022, so they're 2022 releases. And this includes that giant batch of stuff that GMT shipped out in late January, early February, which definitively did not start shipping until 2022. Most of those games are listed as 2021 releases on BGG, right? Which is where most people would go check that. And that's where I would go check that. But and as we started to look at this large list of things, we found that a lot of these games were released in 2022. So they shouldn't be eligible. And some of those games that were submitted were released as early as 1981, right? So clearly a lot of work had to go into that open ballot process. And I know Harold has kind of staked out the position that he'd like the determination. I'm not quoting you, but if I'm misrepresenting your position, tell me. I think Harold has staked out the position that he would like the selection of the awards, whatever the steps are, to be as open as possible, right? And that's actually kind of one of my motivations for doing this show in the first place, because and to kind of respond to a couple of things that have questions that have come up is like, well, so this one shouldn't have been in there, right? From whatever award it is, from 2 years ago or whenever it was. This shouldn't have gotten a Charles S. Roberts Awards. Well, okay. So let's stipulate, and I think we'll all agree on this point, that there's a game out there somewhere, don't know what it's called, but somewhere, that we will all the three of us will have different positions as to whether it's a war game or not, right? I think that's a very safe assumption. And I think if you put any three people in the same room and ask them that question, you could come up with examples where some of them consider such a game to be suitable for the awards or not. So the question then becomes, who decides? Because we're now asking for a decision to be made. Who decides? And I've been saying for at least a couple of weeks, Skyhawk came out in 2022. I'm just going to point that out. I don't really want to be the person that makes that decision, and I don't think it should be left up to any given individual, right? I am happy to democratize that, but we also have to have a sort of manageable process too, right? And the previous process wasn't super manageable, so I was looking at, how do other awards do it, and I think Harold's got a point in that. Because of the sort of the insularity of our hobby, it's very difficult to make a model like the Academy that does the Oscars work, right? Because this was a thing that we discussed. It's like, well, can we have like game companies submit their own games for consideration? And I'm like, in principle, that's great. But frankly, when I send them emails, they don't answer me most of the time. So I'm not convinced that we would get a lot of feedback from a lot of publishers. And just as convinced that the feedback that we would get would be from the same 2 or 3 publishers who would then come to dominate the whole process, which I think is undesirable. So I think our idea was that we wanted to recognize the history of the Charles S. Roberts Awards in that it has always been a vote by the gaming community, right? It has always been a public vote from the very beginning, even though at various points that was a selected group of the people who were at Origins, for example. But we also wanted to kind of do a better management of the process. And we wanted a variety of different voices involved in that process, right? So it wasn't just like old crusty hairy dudes that have been gaming since 1974 and who have an ID card that says I have been gaming since 1974, right? We wanted some old voices, but we wanted some new voices as well, so that we could provide on the public ballot then a good variety of different perspectives, however that shakes out. And I don't know how, and I'm not asking, so we're clear on that, Harold. I don't know how many votes you guys had to deal with in the SD HistCon public part of the vote.
Yeah.
But we had a number of votes on the nominating ballot for the 2021 awards that was at the very upper reaches of stuff we could handle, right? Essentially and compounding that is the fact that we had like 24 awards, right? So that complicates it tremendously, and it was just an enormous amount of data that we had to go through. But at the same time, we didn't feel like we could just say, well, we're just going to cut back to 3 awards. Not that there's anything wrong with 3 awards, but that's just not where the Charles S. Roberts Awards were.
Yeah.
And that would have been a crazy, dramatic change to cut us down to 6 categories or something like that. And I frankly like the idea of having individual categories by historical period. I think that's great. I think we'll be able to, I think there's enough awesome games in all of those categories every year to recognize their excellence. And I just as soon be able to recognize them rather than saying game of the year. And it's this very popular game that made the biggest splash that year. I'm kind of sounding a little bit backhanded now that I don't mean it that way, because I don't think that certainly Red Flag Over Paris falls into that category, and it's an awesome game, and well deserving of an award. But you guys are kind of coming at this from a different angle than I think the Charles S. Roberts Awards were.
Absolutely. Right. And there's plenty of room for all sorts of different slices and dices to this thing, these historical games that we play. Look, I'm really happy that you're involved and have such a systems view of how these processes work, because you really do have to be practical. We received, our public nominations were in the order of magnitude of 100. So very easy to manage, nothing like what you deal with, and nobody knows who we are, and we'll probably never be that, right? That quantity, which is okay.
Would you like to take over? I'm just.
We'll take 1 award at a time over the
we'll give you
years.
We'll give you 1 a year. You can have medieval this year. How about that?
But we have to be practical, right? You have to be practical, because the resource thing, we just don't have the resources to be. And I guess my concern with the public nomination is really a broader issue, and that is, how do we define the breadth of the Charles S. Roberts Award? And again, I love you, but I hear you say war game, and
I keep doing that.
And frankly, Charles S. Roberts is not a war game award. War games are included, but what does Charles S. Roberts say they are? Conflict
simulations. Yep. That's absolutely right.
That's in your charter. And that was the other bit of beef that you and I traded politely, but you nicely define conflict simulations. Then you go in to leave it behind and say war game 50 times without defining war game. So, the fear that the public solved for me was always accessibility. The stuff, U-boat, no problem. Fortress America was the other thing that's been in the history of the Charles S. Roberts that people went ballistic over, right?
I'm really trying to find out the details of that, by the way.
Well, I will ask you, I don't know how well you know Roger McGowan, but I had a very private discussion with Roger on that, and it was very interesting. And the establishment, the establishment gamers blew up on that in particular, because it was, I think it was less about the game and more that it was Hasbro, right? And so I think
Bradley, I'm pretty sure Milton Bradley was owned by Hasbro.
Yes, very good. Yeah, so a monster by another name, right? So I think that was how dare you, right? Not use an SPI or Avalon Hill game when whatever it is. So I think that's the thing I'm trying to protect, is that these games that people like but don't fit the definition of the most conservative of hobbyists are allowed to slip through. I think that's what I'm worried about. And I absolutely understand, Gary, after some thought, why you went away from the public nomination process, because it's a beast. And, slight misspellings, and then having to, I can't imagine, what you do in that regard.
Most of the misspellings we managed to figure out. There were some, but because of the way that the technical limitations of the form, though, what we did get was some characters that were not rendered correctly when we got the report. And in almost every case, we were able to figure out what that voter was talking about. Almost. There were a couple where we're just like, I don't know what this is. So,
But one more input on the history of Charles S. Roberts. There was a time I talked to Mark Herman a good deal about this. I think you're going to have him on soon, and you should talk to him about it. But there was a time where there was I don't know what it was. Can't call it a union. Maybe it's just a conference of designers and publishers, and they all hung out and met once a year. And
at Origins, I would think.
Yeah, it probably was, and I can't remember what it was called, but that group used to nominate, and that was it. So, can you imagine now, though? How would you get a nomination for something like, I don't know, Watergate, right? I guess there's multiple publishers for Watergate now, but do any of those publishers have any other historical games, even much less, kind of the conservative hex and counter war games? So how many game companies would you have to touch in the hobby to make sure you get every Watergate that's out there?
Let's bring them in. If Watergate was Capstone's first historical game before they started adding all these other ones, well, so then you got to update it each year and then you drop them off. I mean, and we're kind of in that boat. We keep an eye on every judge we have. I'm going to watch their content before I go throw them an invite, right? And we found some great people, but if all of a sudden they, I don't know, start reviewing a new hobby, which is totally great, then I'm going to drop them. So that does seem like a logistical nightmare where you have to evaluate every single company each year because they may have dropped. I mean, that's what I think I like. And I think it's a great thing that we have these 3 different approaches because it yields different results and they're all valid approaches to the hobby. And actually, so one of our judges asked us, well, what's a historical game? And we've intentionally used this broad definition to avoid this whole conversation that seems to pop up every week, right? And even then, we kind of came up with one and told them, hey, we're intentionally keeping this broad, but I didn't want to have this conversation of, well, Watergate's not a war game. But Watergate's a great small factor game that if we had started 4 years ago would probably be up there for the running for our small form game. So anyways, I'm not really sure where I was wrapping up that thought, but I guess I will wrap it up with, I think it validates 3 different approaches because as you said, Gary, we can all look at the same game and all have different feelings on it, whether it's even a war game or not.
That's just Matt. You sort of touched on something else that I wanted to discuss, which is kind of the international character of conflict simulations. Okay,
sure.
So we had one of the things that was also suggested is, okay, well, why don't we put together a list of these are the games that were released in 2021, for example, or whatever year it was. Okay, well, are we capturing everything though? I'm not sure we are. Even if we don't try to curate that list at all, are we capturing everyone from every publisher? Because even now, there's every so often a new, not even new, an American company that's a publisher. Company might be stretching it, but a new American publisher, a recent American publisher who hasn't done maybe a lot of stuff. But the thing that made a bigger splash is not their first game, and I had never heard of them before. And I'm not exactly isolated, right? So to say nothing of the challenge of publishers outside the US and Canada, right? There's publishers in the UK, France, Germany, Poland, the Middle East. There's one publisher in Israel, as far as I'm aware. Japan, Hong Kong, right? Did I say Italy? I meant to say Italy too. So we have this kind of international situation. And there's some really excellent things that are coming out from outside the U.S. in addition to all the excellent things that are coming from inside the U.S. and Canada. And I wouldn't want to miss those. Is it then if we were to say, okay, over the course of 2021, we put together this list of every game we know about that should sort of qualify, and then we put that out to the potential voters and say, these are our ideas. You don't have to not vote for one of these, but these are games that we know came out. Are we then tacitly endorsing that list of games or the individual games that are on that list and disadvantaging an amazing game that we may have missed because we don't happen to have anybody on the ground in Poland, for example?
So
And I'd hate Spain. Did I say Spain? I should have said Spain. The thriving war game communities in Spain, Italy, France. Germany's working on it, but they've got baggage. So, how do we account for that sort of presence outside the U.S.? I mean, Harold, I think you're covered on this because you got Fred an award. So,
well, that's
although
interesting.
U.S. publisher,
You bring up Fred's award, but when BGG was doing their annual vote, Fred had to move to get his game reclassified to 2021 because it was caught up in that end of the year. And so initially his game was not eligible for the 2021 BGG awards. And so, they have way more resources than probably the three of us, even if a lot of their legwork is done by BGG
money.
users.
Are you kidding?
Right, exactly. And so even they're missing games.
Mm-hmm.
And so you talk about, well, are you stumping for a game if you limit things? And we took an intentional approach with at least trying to be very clear that our examples, okay, so Pacific War in Vietnam 1965, 1975, are for most serious historical hobbyists the biggest releases of 2022.
Sure.
As an example, we have excluded those from the awards because they're largely straight reprints. John Company, second edition, however, we wanted to list as an example of something that's not a straight reprint and probably is a game that's eligible and going to get a lot of votes. But I didn't want that to be an endorsement, but I think you just have to do it. But again, we're dealing with 25 people. You're dealing with thousands.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but it's a question that is going to be and was asked, right? So we had, and that was, I think, part of the thing that generated a lot of confusion is there was like people were asking questions and nobody came out with an answer. So, and I think that was problematic. So, we're moving to, work towards, and we're not quite all the way there yet, but we're working towards better transparency. So I want to ask about that. How do we address that, right? How transparent do you want to be in the context of those awards? So you want to have like public meeting minutes of the meetings where you decided those things? I don't know. I don't know that I have a necessarily firm position on that. What do you think, Harold?
Well, transparency is valuable in a lot of ways. I think that you've done a nice job of making your thought process. And I say I'm with you and your team, but making your thought process visible and the what's and the whys. And people are going to disagree. I disagree with some things, but I'm impressed with the transparency. Transparency in voting gets to be a little odd, right? I mean, I know, Matt, you're going to make the names available as to who voted, right?
Yep.
You've already done that for the most part, and that's great.
And all of us knew that, though, in fairness.
Yeah, but it's not something you need to do, right? I mean, the public votes, so you don't have to worry about who voted, and you're not going to report public votes.
Oh no.
And I'll just chime in. We're not reporting our public. Like, there's a whole next month will be the public vote element of this. I'm not listing those. Yeah.
No, that would be crazy, and I would consider that over the line. To do that personally. I mean, you want to be transparent, but you don't want to necessarily disturb folks' privacy either. So right. At no point will be releasing the list of people that voted for the Charles S. Roberts Awards in the public ballot. We'll release the names of the people on the committee. But that's a little different. Those folks are by and large not, I don't want to say not private citizens, but they're they're people who people know. And that's one reason why we picked them. Right, because we know them too, and we knew that they know their stuff, and those are the voices that we wanted.
It's interesting though. There's a little bit of the sausage factory here that you don't really want to see or talk much about. These are volunteer organizations, and
with vast riches. I mentioned the vast riches available to us here.
Vast riches as far as good intentions.
Yeah.
And so we're all charging down this highway, and sometimes you'll have a meeting and it'll be you and one other person, right? Everybody else is busy with something else, understandably, and no complaints, right? But sometimes a small number of people have to make pretty material decisions.
Yep.
To make this go forward in ways that have to do with the outcome big time, like the structure of the award and who's involved and how they're involved. And so, the transparency is interesting, but we all have to accept that in these volunteer orgs, it's not run like, we were at, I don't know, Wells Fargo Bank, and
we're getting a government grant, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We'll be lucky to get grant from the Players Aid. I'm just saying.
The grant we got, but not the one we asked for, but that'd be fine.
He's the grant we deserve.
Yep.
That's awesome.
I'm just saying.
Where is Grant? What the hell's happened to Grant?
Grant they're busy guys, man. They got like content upon content.
I think they're buried under Frosthaven, actually.
That's plausible. Yeah, literally buried under Frosthaven. Have you seen the size of that box? I'm not even kidding.
Gary, I can't pass. We're talking about you're not an insulated guy. You're in Ohio, dude. You are insulated.
Better be insulated. It's 14 degrees outside right now.
Yeah, in many ways, but
I'm 45 pounds less insulated than I was this time last year, fortunately. So,
no, we owe it to ourselves to broaden these awards to make sure we capture some of that stuff that's in Europe. And Japan and wherever else, right? I love seeing a new game. These Japanese games, I'm linked with a handful of Japanese players, and the stuff they play looks awesome. And I just want to, I just want to grab it and translate it and reprint it so I can play it.
I've said the same thing on some Japanese stuff. Certainly, I mean, they've been doing this in Japan for a long time, but for like Chinese games, even I'm like, that looks awesome.
Yeah,
I should get that. But I don't read Chinese. I will sit it, put it on the shelf and admire it, and it will be awesome. And I will sometimes take the maps out of the thing and say, I don't know what this place is because I can't read Chinese. So we need some help on that, right? Yeah. And that was a thing that we made a point to do, and I think we're not quite where we want to be on that. Was to make sure that we have folks from other parts of the planet involved, so that we at least can get some level of visibility in Europe or Asia or wherever, that to the extent that we have in the US, right? I mean, but even so, I'm not familiar with every single one of these games. I mean, that's a thing that gets asked, right? Well, how can you vote on these things if you haven't played it, right? And then what if it's a big game that takes you months to play? Well, I didn't play that, right? The monster game people will be like, I'm going to put this on the table next, but that's going to be like a mid 2024.
Yeah, retirement is looking golden.
Yeah, exactly. So how do we address that to the extent that you even have to? I mean, I've kind of decided I'm not sure that we have to, because we can't ask people to be playtesters on all these games, right? But there are people who said no, who said no to when we sent them a committee invitation that said, no, I don't think I'm qualified because I haven't played enough of these games.
We had judges
came out this year, and I think that's a completely reasonable decision. But there are people that feel that way, and I'm jealous of the Spiel des Jahres people that can have the time to do that too.
Well, for the Zenobia Awards, right? So the Volko and I kind of kicked that out and pulled together a committee and built that from the ground up, but a very different kind of award, right? Mm-hmm. Games you would have never heard of. Mm-hmm. So the public can't vote. It's just not useful. And then we just tried to filter. So multiple rounds of filtering these games by new game designers that aren't complete. But at the end, we ended up with, was it 5 finalists, 5, 6 finalists, 5, I think. And then we had to go to the tough business of playing each one. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't going to vote until I played each one. So, it's an interesting question and a question for you, Matt. Gary, do I give you the question to ask Matt, or
you can ask Matt? What are we in a,
okay.
This isn't a deposition.
So Matt, your award started in early February, right? Of the following year.
Yep.
Would the participants have played more games if that process started in July or September?
Of course. But Gary, is it okay if I answer Harold's question, or should?
No. Yes.
Okay. No. Yeah, I mean, yes, of course. And that's one, it is a little bit rush process this year because of when we decided to form it. But now, once someone's on the committee and they enjoy it, speaking with one in particular was like, okay, in 2023, I'm super excited for this. But now I know I have 2023 to do planning for voting in 2024, right? But yeah, of course, if we push this till March and July, yeah, and then we could award them at Historic Fest and have in-person presentation. That's all great. Part of the origin of the Historical Board Games Awards were, and again, this is not shade to anything you are doing, Gary,
I'm
but
not
we
going to
get
take it that way.
around to July and August and September, and it's okay. We're talking about a game that it came out in January 2021, and now it's November 2022. Yeah, okay, I've heard about it. What? I guess on one hand, it's what's the intent of your award, and what are you trying to accomplish by awarding that 19 months later? And
Mhm.
so, yeah, if we gave our judges more time, that would obviously be better. But I mean, it's just a little bit of the nature of our hobby, and that's why I wanted to get diverse gaming, not only representation from as much around the world as we could, but also hobby interests. If you look at someone like Garrick Samples, way different type of games he plays than what Rich and I talk about on a monthly basis. Both with strong historical touchstones, but completely different. And so hopefully the intent there is that judge is focusing on this thing more so than Rich and I, and then you get a broader diversity. But that's the
So
intent, at least.
So I'm not going to address the delay for the 2021, which I think everybody noticed, right?
Right.
And I will say that without going into further details, as we'll see this year, the intent is to get that process completed in a much shorter amount of time.
Sure, of course.
I was actually not convinced, though, that we would necessarily see a higher percentage of games played by initiating the process, say in mid-year, than we would say initiating the process in January or February. And two caveats on that, though. I kind of feel like there's a more representation of larger games in the Charles S. Roberts Awards than we're necessarily going to see. And I'll be delighted to be proved wrong here too. In the Summit Award or certainly the Zenobia Award, which is really an apples and oranges comparison because those games are not complete when the process is initiated. And the Historical Board Game Awards, I expect the Historical Board Game Awards to pick up things that the Charles S. Roberts voters will not pick up on, right? Where the Charles S. Roberts Awards are more likely to recognize the latest OCS game or BCS game or whatever. I don't believe we have an OCS release in 2022, so that may be academic. But and the fact that even now there's 18 awards, 17, 18 awards, right? So we will hopefully get to recognize a lot. This is just structural, right? Because we have 18 awards. Many of those are the historical categories, which are basically exclusive, right? You're not going to nominate a game in both the medieval category and the modern category unless it's Time Tripper. Then maybe we could, but we're safe from Time Tripper right now, right? But so we'll hopefully be able to pick up a lot more of those games. But it seems to me like we may or may not have more play hours in the middle of the year than at the beginning of the year. Now, 3 years from now, then yeah, I think so. But I'm not necessarily convinced that that's a major factor. And again, I don't think. I mean, the Academy voters aren't. They don't like sit them down in a room and lock the doors and force them to watch The English Patient, right? Presumably with armed gunmen standing guard over them so they don't doze off. But I don't think we can police that, nor do I think we necessarily want to try. But again, it's one of those things that we really do want to at least have thought about, right? Because we would like people to be informed voters, of course. And we'd like them to vote for games that they've played. But I think mostly the weight will go towards people voting for games that they have in fact played. Unless they are like system partisans or something like that, voting for the latest coin or OCS thing or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. One, people are going to vote. We're weird about our hobbies, right? And if I
You're
tell
telling
you,
me,
If I tell you, Gary, 1914, why is that garbage on your shelf? You're going to get I've never played 1914. I'm sure it's a great system, but you're going to take offense to that. And when someone poo-poos the U.S. Civil War, they have offended me and my family on so many ways. But so we take
It's
offense
just
to
a
those things.
reprint of Eric Lee Smith's 1983 victory game Civil War, isn't it?
What's that, honey? Yeah.
Get the shotgun.
That goes the other way, right? So if and I don't mean this to be like discredit anyone's level of hobby, but someone who plays one war game a year, one historical game a year, they're going to be adamant about it. They're going to go vote for it. I think that's going to be most voters. I could be wrong though. Like if I just played when I started my podcast, if you go listen to that first episode, I rave about Battle Hymn because that was like the first thing I dove into that year. And Battle Hymn. I still like Battle Hymn. Battle Hymn's a fine game, but is it like a top 20 game of all time? No, I don't think so. So I think then you could maybe think that a lot of voters are going to feel the same way. If they play one war game and they like it, they're going to be adamant about that and they're going to vote for that. At least in the like public sense.
Yeah.
I agree. And this is a great point too. I mean, I am relatively committed to the hobby, right, of historical games, which a lot of which I would call war games, and maybe some of which I would call historical board games. And I might get 15 games played this year. And we there were like 40 nominees for the Charles S. Roberts Awards for 2021. I mean, I don't believe it physically be possible to vote for all those. I am envious of both of you who have, 1 or 3 awards to worry about, with relatively minimal overlap too. So there's not like your historical game awards category, for example. There's overlap with 2 of those categories, but one of them is the best of the year and one of them is the most innovative game of the year, or I'm paraphrasing clumsily. And the other one is the best small format game, right? So you have a pretty clean sort of set of categories where you don't have to necessarily overthink, which we did, where a game fits. And was that a consideration, Matt?
Yeah, I think the simplicity. 2, and again, we just did this whole thing on small games because last year it was really with Red Flag Over Paris, maybe Watergate beforehand, was really a year of me personally like finding small form historical games and having a great appreciation for them. I don't know if you've heard of this game, Flashpoint South China Sea.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, I'm not just saying this because Harold's on here. You can go listen to the podcast where I talk about it, but great game. And so playing these small form games, and it's like, I want to award this. And I know obviously the Charlies have it. They have you guys call it the magazine, but that's basically
that's just magazine games, though. We're not picking up postcard games, or we
right.
wouldn't pick up Red Flag Over Paris or Watergate in that category.
Or Flashpoint, or
Flashpoint. Is Flashpoint that small? That small though? I didn't think it was. Harold.
What is the map dimensions? The small.
Well,
Harold's,
again, here,
yeah, I'm confused too. I mean, how long does it take to play? Let me put it that way.
Yeah, an hour or less.
Okay. I mean, okay.
Yeah, and that's what the categories aim to design is whether it's GMT's lunchtime game, whether it's a postcard game, a magazine game. Again, we're going with inclusive in terms of games that are included here. But I guess to go back to your original question, was that intentional? Yeah, it was, because I wanted to award those things specifically because I found such a new appreciation for them. And they are weighted so differently against something like Pacific War, which is not eligible, but was my favorite thing I played last year, hands down. But should I really compare Red Flag Over Paris to Pacific War? I don't think so, but I think they both deserve recognition.
That's like comparing apples and space shuttles.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But that was that was part of our thought process too. My example that I think I've given publicly was La Vendée, which is an amazing looking game from Against the Odds, and it's the game that got boned in 2021 because too many people voted for it in a category that people voted for it in two different categories, and we weren't able to move those votes around to blank spots on ballots. It probably would have gotten a nomination had all those votes been in one category. And we would have called it, even though it belongs in Napoleonics, we would have called it late gunpowder had it gotten, had the votes been there. If that was the trick to nominating it, we would have, because we tried to keep as much voter input as we can, as we wanted to discard as little of that voter will as we could.
So why didn't you exercise a little bit of judgment? And
I could. Well, I mean, that's the question: is who decides, right? Yeah. I don't know, and then we'd be potentially bumping somebody else. And the way it was written, we're supposed to have 5 nominees, and we have a little bit more flexibility moving forward. But one of the things that I love about the small format game, the Anglo-Zanzibar game award, if you will, is that it left us with the freedom to drop a category, right? Not because that made it easier, although it did at this point. What's one more category? But because it let us kind of say, we're not the only awards. There are other awards out there, and we at the Charles S. Roberts Awards are officially pleased that there are other awards out there with different emphases and methodologies than we necessarily had back in 1978 or have today. And I think those perspectives are valuable. Most, lively pastimes have multiple awards. Movies have a bunch of awards. Books have a bunch of awards. Baseball has a bunch of awards. You know what I'm saying? So are either of you considering adding more awards to your awards?
Yeah, I'll go for no. I mean, am I open to the idea at some point? Yeah, but I mean, I'm gonna walk before we run. I mean, I take on enough hobbies as is.
Yeah,
and there's way too many, and so no. Not this year. Like, let's see how 1 year goes, and let's do a full let's do a full year of, we have our voting committee. Let's let them chew on being on the voting committee for a full year, and then we'll change it up on them once they're coming.
I am not suggesting that it would be a good idea to insert a 4th award on Tuesday. So,
well, my vote's in, so don't worry about me. I'm out. Yeah. It is it's an interesting question. I really don't care who does the award. I have some additional ideas. Economics tells us that you reward the stuff that you want more of, and you tax the stuff that you want less of. And I think, if we really wanted to recognize, or we wanted to pull a more diverse community into gaming, which we haven't talked about at all, but it's something that we talk about a lot at SD Hist.
And I think everybody that hears that statement would be in agreement with what you've just said.
Yeah, I think that many people that hear that statement would be in agreement, Gary. But yeah, I know you two guys are. So I'm not, by bringing it up, I'm not trying to shit on anybody. But I would say that, if we could create an award or a series of awards in any of our formats, or any future format that anybody wants to come up with, that gives an award to somebody that brings some more diversity to the hobby, right? Because most of our awards are going to go to old white guys. There are going to be a few exceptions, but that's kind of how it's going to work.
Well, for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. And so
the old white guys are still doing this.
Yeah. And I love old white guys, being a member of that club, I have no problem with it. But, in the interest of rewarding that diversity when it occurs, an award that addresses that would be, I think, helpful. And I would also like to see different slicing and dicing. I know the Charlies have tried that, but different types of the new graphics artist, or rules editor, or something that awards people for their excellent work, because the designers get too much reward. And there are thousands of people that work on games for free across our hobby every year that deserve something. Best playtester, how about that?
Yeah, nobody playtest, the great unsung heroes of
Yeah.
gaming of all kinds actually are in fact the playtesters. I think what you're talking about, Harold, will also help to highlight some frankly better history, right?
Yeah.
The example I gonna give is kind of outside wargaming, but there's a redesign of Puerto Rico, right, which has been criticized for years for its, let's say, cavalier treatment of the history involved. And somebody has gone in and kind of rethought that to reflect the history that actually happened in Puerto Rico in the period that that game nominally represents. Now, one might say that that game was not an attempt to be a simulation of anything, with which I wouldn't necessarily disagree. But certainly, if you're attracted to historical games, somebody might run into a game like that and get a really maybe not complete or maybe outright bad vision of how that went down. So more diverse recognition of more diverse viewpoints, I think, is also going to give us better recognition of the history. And for a lot of us, at least, it is the history that brings us here in the first place.
That was the idea behind the Zenobia Award, right? Which, as you mentioned, is very different than what we're all doing.
Yeah, apples and oranges.
But what we did was an effort to bring forward designers that were just different than us. And the expectation, the games come from the gamers. The people that play the games are the ones that design them in the future. And so if we can increase that in any way, and we're seeing a handful of games that are spinning off from that Zenobia Award, and very interesting topics that weren't explored prior.
And selection of topics, that's a good point too. Not just well-trodden topics, right? I don't know that we're talking about the next Great Bulge game, for example, but topics that we have never seen a historical game about before.
Yeah, now that'd be an award I'd really be interested in, obvious, as well as the awards you mentioned. But we have these serious awards, best of the year and most innovative, and then I like that we've kind of taken this tongue-in-cheek approach to the Anglo Zanzibar Award, but doing the same thing with like the most best new, topic in wargaming, or historical gaming, whatever you want to call it. But just as a consumer of these things, I'd be super interested in an award that recognized an obscure topic, or
I would too, actually.
Tackled a new topic in an interesting way.
And I'd love to see the winner and the top 10 runners up, and I would probably go out and investigate each one as a hobbyist.
Well, hell, I mean, I'll tell you, I did that. That was my one payoff for doing this for the CSRs for 2021 is, before the nominations got announced, I ordered several games that I had to do some research on. I'm like, oh, this looks awesome. I need to have this. I'm going to order it right now.
War of the Triple Alliance in the was it Late Gunpowder? Now that was a game that I had no idea. I think that was published in South America somewhere.
It's a South America topic, but it's NAC War Games.
NAC, okay.
Yeah, I don't remember where they're in Europe, but I don't remember where in Europe.
So would have never come across my radar in the day-to-day, but just that the fact that it popped up, and I think someone mentioned on Twitter, and they're like, this won't win, but you should all check this out. And that was a game that would have never come across my radar.
I am not going to provide you with any inside information here, but it came real close.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah, real close.
I'm glad I snagged it.
Very strong representation. So but that's a great example.
I think, just real sorry to cut you off. I think that's another, again, I put on this different hat to do these awards, but really it came from being a consumer of this stuff. Is every year the Charlies come out and it's great. You see we do our reactions and we talk about them, but really what I get value out of them, I don't care if this game that I don't like won. I like the list and I like going through them, and I can skip. I'm not a big World War I gamer. I don't have any problem with it. It's just not my favorite. I'll probably skip that topic unless something really jumps. I guess Verdun, when that came out, that caught my eye and I bought that right away. But that's what any of these awards do for me. That's the value it provides me. It's going to provide different value to different people. But that's my takeaway when I'm not the one in the driver's seat.
I mean, I would do that with the Oscars, right? I mean, I hadn't
Sure.
seen all those movies, obviously, but you'd have your, I would love Lord of the Rings to win another one of these this year. That'd be great, right?
Goodreads,
yeah.
each category, like want to read.
Yeah, but you pencil in some of those things, and actually, War of the Triple Alliance is on my radar now, and it's supposed to be absolutely awesome. So, but I mean, these can, and I think we did a pretty good job of that this year. I'm not saying we did a perfect job of giving some recognition to some things that maybe folks might not necessarily had heard of. Could we do better? Sure. But I'd also love to see other recognition too from other awards for not only that, but for different things that we're just not going to recognize, right? There was, I think, an attempt to try to kind of pick up on recognizing the content creator space that exists now that didn't exist back in 1987 when the CSR awards became different from the Origins awards. We now have this vibrant community all over the place. We got blogs and people writing like huge write-ups on BGG, and people doing videos, and people doing all kinds of stuff.
Unboxings.
Yeah, exactly. What are you trying to say, Harold?
Hey, we have on my unboxings. If you've never seen them, they're pretty good.
But well, I mean, okay, I'm not even saying we have to limit it like that, but I get where I'd like that to be recognized too.
Sure.
But I'm not convinced that I have to do it, right? No. I'd love it if somebody else would. Brant, get on that. So I know Brant's probably going to watch this tonight, if not, later on. So get on that. But there's a variety of things like the individual artists and rules writers, right? Who's not necessarily the designer of the game. John Zinsner from AEG, your role-playing publisher, actually, I had a conversation with him at an Origins hotel party at one point. And he said, the first thing I learned when I started doing this as both a publisher, guy running a publisher, and a designer was have somebody else write the rules. I'll design the rules. I'll hand them a book of stuff. They write the rules. Very few war game companies are operating at a scale where they can actually do that.
Right.
And I know that there are some examples where that happens, right? And then sometimes that's kind of democratized over the span of 20 years or so, where different successions of different people have kind of their hands in the living rule book and fine tune it. I think there's space for awards that aren't limited to a single year, right? Like best all-time war game series, right? Somebody could do that. I'm not going to do that, but somebody could do that.
There's no reason that every organization that is involved, whether it's a local club or, First Minnesota, man, you hear so much about those guys. I've tempted to move to Minnesota just to go visit them on their weekly game night, right?
Yeah, and they do some amazing stuff.
Yeah, very cool, right? Very interesting group, right? David Doctor, if he's going to call me by my last name, I would accept that, but the rest of it would be fun. And I think that, why don't those guys come up with an award or two? How cool would that be?
Yeah, absolutely. Hell, they could call it the first Minnesota award. That by itself would be awesome, right?
Yes. Every war game convention, right? Small conventions across the country should have one. There's tons of room. I hope people aren't, I know there's some naysayers that complain that there's so many awards, but I just think we've scratched the surface. So I would love to see a ton of awards.
There's not that many in our space. There's more than there were 5 years ago, but there's not that many. I guess I'll close us out here with another question, which is kind of about how you think you're presenting your awards. And maybe there could be a marketing angle of that, right? How are you presenting it in terms of the public facing part of it, right? How are you marketing it? How are you trying to increase engagement with both whatever public part of the process that you have, and then when you announce the winners, how to get people to engage with that? Harold, what has been your approach on this? And I know, again, you've got some peeps working on this, so it's not just you.
We've got a team, and it's very collaborative and a great group. Well, our key event is the November face-to-face SD HisCon, and Matt and Gary expect to see you there this next year. Registration's on me for you too, if you want.
You ship me a pair of hiking boots or something, because it sounds like I'm walking.
And a tent, yeah, pup tent.
Yeah.
But that would be an ideal place for us to release the next year. But we haven't started yet, right? Matt's ahead of us there. We're going to have an SD HisCon East announcement soon at a notable place in the Northeast. That may be another place.
Now see, that's an option.
That would be awesome. And
Northeast, like Northeastern Ohio, would be fabulous. In fact,
that's what we all were thinking.
I'm just saying.
Having grown up in Southwestern Ohio,
I'll find you a hotel right here in Akron, Ohio.
Excellent. So, it was a press blast that we sort of did and put it out this first year. I don't know what we'll do next year. Maybe it will be the November convention, but we'll work on it and decide. It's, we have so many things going on that it'll have to fit into the system somewhere.
Matt, how about you? And you've got the blog, right? Which is unlike my blog, which has been sitting there.
Yeah, but our main outlet is the podcast. It always has been, always will be. So it'll be some kind of, the plan for now is a stream of sorts with Bill and I. The problem with Historic Fest, which if you're looking for SD HisCon Midwest, well, you just...
Now you're talking about the one in Kansas City.
So Kansas City in August. The problem with that is it's in August, right?
Problem with that is it's in Kansas City.
Oh,
have you seen airfares to Kansas City?
Yeah, but there's like a caravan of Ohio. You can hop in Bill's minivan, I'm sure, and just
maybe,
all of you.
Yeah, maybe.
But we won't even touch on the Kansas City barbecue and all the stuff, the World War I museum, and I won't even talk about the Negro Leagues museum, I won't mention the Jazz Museum. I won't even mention Union Station or any of these great things that'll bring you to Kansas City. I won't touch any of those. Don't worry.
It's that other big thing there.
Yeah. So I don't know, like all of those things sound great. Having an in-person presentation, doing this, doing that, but every project I've undertaken, there's been things that work and don't work. Whether it's the podcast, it's painting miniatures, it's the convention. And so we're going to just try some things and see what works and see what sticks. I'm not going to, plan too much before. It's just Bill and I. So
you got to start a war game museum in Kansas City. That would be awesome.
I'm working on it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a D&D museum. Admittedly, it's crap, but I'm just saying, if D&D can have a museum, so can we. I think, I don't know if I kind of wanted this to be like a three-way conversation. I don't necessarily want to talk about the Charles S. Roberts.
Gary, how are you going to present next year?
But we're going to probably do it on the internet again. But that's something we're talking about, right? We have had conversations about doing it at an actual physical event. That conversation is ongoing. I don't know that we're going to get there, but I don't know that we're not. One thing that we had to consider, though, was like our mandate to avoid commercial entanglements that came from Charles S. Roberts. So we didn't feel we felt like an actual game company, like doing it at GMT, Weekend at the Warehouse, or Compass Expo or whatever. We felt that would be inappropriate. So those discussions did not happen. And there's a couple obvious choices, and some of those were explored before. And I don't know that I'm privy to all the information based on that didn't pan out. That's a thing we think about, but we'd also think about doing a live awards show on the internet. So that's like a live show, not just Dan, right? So that's an ongoing thing. The Charles S. Roberts Awards, it's important to understand, to answer this question very briefly, because I don't want to tie these two fine gentlemen up all night with this thing. It's important to understand that the Charles S. Roberts Awards started as functionally synonymous with the Origins Awards. Okay, they were given away at Origins. The voting was done by attendees of Origins, and therefore they were just by the nature of that. Remember, this is 1974, 1975. That's what was happening at Origins, right? So I think this is a little more complicated than this, but I think it's important to understand that part of the historical context at the very beginning, and I'm awaiting further information. So anyway, I'll give Matt. I'll start with Matt. If you have any final remarks, or if you have any questions for Harold or I, actually, before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I I think right away, Gary, you made a comment. The timing was, I think, just all our ears were burning because before you were announced, I was, complaining to Bill, and then we were putting the groundwork, and then we invited you.
You were not the only ones having these kinds of discussions.
Right. Of course not. And so we had sent an invitation out to the committee members, and you had said, I will get back to you. And I mentioned to Bill, I said, Bill, I think Gary's going to take over the CSRs with no other background information on that.
I was the last person to find out about this, apparently.
And it's what I had assumed. And so I think shortly thereafter, you made a comment that I agree with full-heartedly, is that there's room for all of this. And just talking about how there's other awards that all three of us want to see, I think it's great. The value added from these awards is great, and it's going to be different value for everyone. So I think these sessions, maybe not everyone gets something out of it, but it is a great resource. Gosh, when I started Historic Fest, Harold said, give me a call, and Harold and I chatted on the phone. And so that having these resources, I think, is just going to push all this stuff even further and better everything. So no comments other than thank you.
All going to be running conventions in 2024 too. Oh my God.
Yeah. We're
a mess. Oh my God.
I mean, I don't have a 2024 date yet, but sure.
Okay. I don't either, but I've told people I'm going to have a convention in 2024, even if it's just like me and 4 other people. I can live with that.
Hey, Next War Con 1 was, I think, 17 of us. So
where was that?
That's Kansas City. That was the origin of Historic Fest, was Next War Con 1. And then...
Is that what you played? The next war?
It was all Next War. We had Mitchell Land.
That Next War.
Yep.
Mark Herman is angered.
Yeah. So no closing comments, no questions. Although I just do appreciate having the resources and being able to have a conversation like this, and also not getting into a pissing contest where it's like my award's better than your award, because I think we are doing 3 very distinct things, and it's just great for the people we interact with and fans of the hobby.
And we can settle this mano a mano hopefully in November at SD HistCon, right, Harold?
Yes, perfect.
You have a young, spry personal champion to get in the boxing ring with us.
Absolutely.
Harold, do you have any final comments or questions?
No, Matt took the wind out of my sails. I was going to say my award's better than both of your awards, but
but all your awesomeness is concentrated in one award. That's why, right?
Yeah, my award.
You have to spread the award out among 18 categories.
Yeah. I got to change my ballot for this year. I got to remove a game real quick.
It was this was great. A great conversation. Good to talk to you both about this. And the other thing that's really cool is just the collaboration, the fact that the 3 of us talk a lot about this stuff, and like grown-ups, right? In a hobby that you kind of think it should be. And then last point, Matt, 17 people at a convention to play Next War games is the way every convention should be. Yeah. Right? I mean, that just sounds perfect.
That's an awesome convention. Actually.
Yeah.
I'll be delighted if I get 17 people.
Yeah. I mean, briefly, I've wanted to keep the same feel with Historic Fest, just with more representation, but we still do Next War. And yeah, totally agree.
Yeah.
I'm going to Viking Con next week, and it's 4 of us. So
is Mitch from that part of the country, or did he have to?
Yeah, he's travel? From St. Louis.
Oh, okay. So that's like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Away.
And Rich lives in St. Louis as well.
Okay.
Co-host.
So yeah, that's awesome. So I want to say, I guess I'll close with, I really appreciate both of you coming on to kind of talk through this. I think this is going to be an ongoing thing. I don't imagine this is the last conversation any of the 3 of us are going to have. And maybe we'll loop some more folks in, like Voco kindly offered to put us in touch. You guys know, well, Harold does anyway. The folks running the Zenobia Awards, which you've got a sausage-like finger in anyway. I see this as we're kind of all on the same team here, right? Yeah. And the territoriality, I think, is not really going to benefit anybody. And I'm happy that we're all able to sit down like refined persons of leisure and have these conversations without any acrimony or something, which I think has happened in the past, not necessarily for awards in the wargaming space, but whatever. So I'm happy that we were able to do this. I'm also delighted that you're all sharing some of the blame with me now. So if there are problems about giving awards out in wargaming spaces, I can just say, hey, these guys are doing it too, right?
Yep.
Harold said that's okay. So I got a piece of paper here that says that's signed Harold. It's a blank piece of paper signed Harold.
It says conflict simulations, by
Yes.
the way.
Yes, I know. We're gonna work on that too.
All right.
All right, folks. So Matt and Harold, thanks so much for coming by, and thank everybody for watching. Please thumbs up the video and all that so the algorithm fairy likes us this week. And I will see everybody tomorrow night live at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on my live stream. Everybody have a great night, and we'll see you